Hi all. For today's notable game, let's look at the other remarkable, amazing encounter between Magnus Carlsen and Garry Kasparov in the Reykjavik Rapid of 2004. Magnus Carlsen, I've calculated, was 13 years, 3 months, 17 days old. So that's an online site checking his date of birth and the date of this game. Kasparov 28 years older. Magnus's rank apparently was 700 in the world. He was an international master. Garry Kasparov was ranked 1. Magnus 2484, Kasparov 2831. Magnus kicks off with d4. What would Kasparov play against this? Would he play a King's Indian defense? Grunfeld? Actually, he plays a very, very solid system. d5, classic d5, occupying the center. After c4, the Slav defense, c6. Magnus chose here knight f3. This is actually the most popular move according to Livebook. Black ignores the pawn offering and just plays knight f6 here after knight c3. e6. So we have the Slav triangle. Now we have the move bishop g5. Overall, e3 is also actually more popular, it seems, in Livebook in that position. Now here, usually black plays h6 immediately, but Kasparov, he chose knight bd7. And now we have e3. And this next move signals what is known as the Cambridge Springs defense. Apparently, the first recorded use of the Cambridge Springs was by Manuel Lasker in 1892. The name derives from a 1904 tournament in Cambridge Springs, Pennsylvania, in the US, in which the defense was used several times. Okay, so there have been very famous practitioners, including Bogolojubov, Vasily Smyslov, and of course Kasparov. So here, a common move which many players play and is not particularly good is actually the routine looking bishop d3. The problem with this move in this position is that white potentially has a loose bishop on g5 as well as a pressure point here with this pin on c3, and this is meant to be good for black. Basically, there's a lot of traps to navigate, and this move is not meant to be that good. For example, d takes c4, bishop takes c4, knight e4, hits g5 and c3, and black's having a good time, at least equalizing, at least he can win a pawn potentially, and although white has some compensation here, that's something white should really avoid. So bishop d3 is generally not considered that great here. And there's also a possibility in knight e4, but this is not as bad as maybe some people think, because after bishop takes e4, d takes, white doesn't have to lose the bishop on g5 by playing knight d2, but white actually has a move here in knight e5, and there's a counter trap on d8 to consider, not getting mated on d8, and in this position it's actually okay for white, and even potentially quite good. So really, okay, bishop d3 for various reasons though. I think the more important reason, not knight e4, but d takes c4, knight e4 is offering a good line for black. From a Livebook perspective here, well, I think from an engine perspective, d takes c4 is the way to go here. But this opening choice by Kasparov is not just about traps. In not playing bishop d3, knight d2 is the main move that's played. And I wanted to find out myself actually in preparation for this video, why would anyone at a high level play the Cambridge Springs? Why would Kasparov play it here? Well, if knight d2 is the main move, the thing is, about knight d2. It would seem this diagonal is nice if a battery can be set up later against h2, and even more, a bit more effective if the knight's been moved away from f3. Not only that, the knight being moved away from f3 makes not just c5 possible later as a break, but e5 at the right time. And if black can break with e5, he's liberating the bishop on c8, and he's potentially saddling white with an isolated queen's pawn. So positionally, this is the main line. It's got some ideas basically around isolating white's queen's pawn and trying for an e5 break as well as a c5 break, and pressure on this h2, which would be more vulnerable with the knight here. Now in this position, bishop b4 puts more pressure on b4. And now Magnus chooses queen c2 in this position. And here we have castling. And again, bishop d3 as a routine move is avoided here, because this loose piece issue is really annoying. If bishop d3, d takes c4, hitting both bishops. And here, if bishop takes f6, then we have c takes d3 hitting the queen. That's horrible. So basically winning a piece. So that's to be avoided. So white's got to be very careful here. So bishop e2. But as I say, even if the traps are avoided, black has certain positional ideas. Isolate the queen's pawn, put pressure on the dark squares on this diagonal, taking away the knight from the defense of h2. So it's a viable system at all levels, basically. It's like a cartoon by Pixar. It can appeal to the younger audience as well as the older audience. It's not just a trappy opening, which maybe is a kind of bad reputation in a way to say this is just a trap system. It's not just a trap system. Kasparov is playing it here in Rapid, not just for setting up traps, but for some positional ideas. You'll note, by the way, before bishop e2, black had castled here instead of e5. If e5, then white has a strong move and bishop takes f6 in this particular position. It's very strong with the black king in the center in this particular position, because after knight takes, d takes, knight e4, c takes, this is going to be good for white. This position here is going to be good. This is good for white, infiltrating potentially to the 7th rank. But with black castling, it changes the picture on e5 quite significantly. So e5 needs to be regarded as a major option when black castles here. And I've noticed some opening references only mention c5. And just from a theoretical perspective, this is really incredibly interesting, at least to me, as sometimes I'm an opening geek. In Lightbook, we have a near tie between e5 as a break and c5 as a break. And Kasparov, as the arbiter of that tie, is playing e5 here. And you might think, well, we've just demonstrated it's a kind of pawn sack in that line, but here it actually works quite well, e5. If Magnus tries to win a pawn here with bishop takes f6, it's not brilliant in this position like it was before black castled. I just want to demonstrate that. Magnus actually, he didn't go for winning a pawn, so it's another kind of a trap he navigated again. Because if bishop takes f6, I say it's not brilliant here because takes, we have an important major difference here from the other variations. This position, this position with c takes, knight takes here. This is okay for black. And whatever way it's played for white, if d takes, this is okay for black. he's going to be getting back this pawn. So actually, you know, there's doesn't seem to be a great way for white to gain an advantage here in this line. Like d takes e4, c takes d5. If castling, like taking the pawn there. So whatever way it's played, it seems perfectly okay for black. In trying to get, you might think, hold on a sec, there's one more thing to investigate, trying to get this pawn on d5 here. We mentioned this line, rook c1. Now in this line, black can also play maybe stronger than bishop takes d2, bishop b4 here. This is actually really annoying because black's castled here. He's got the e5 break, and if d takes c6, then black exploits the king still in the center with bishop f5, and his king's not in the center. So this works very well. So this pin is actually really annoying in this e5 line. You see the bishop liberated. So that's why Kasparov is an arbiter. He's got some underlying ideas. e5 is actually, after casting, perfectly okay in this line. Because, yeah, rook c1, he doesn't have to take on d2. An improvement here is bishop b4, which didn't exist if black hadn't castled. This is great because of the bishop f5 resource. And white's losing even more time here. He can't routinely castle. So that's yet another kind of trap to navigate winning the pawn. So behind the scenes here, you know, this minefield is being navigated by Magnus Carlsen against a finesse move, e5 instead of c5. You know, why isn't bishop takes f6? It doesn't work very well there. There's some resources for black. So this is actually an aggressive use of the Cambridge Springs with e5 rather than c5. Still with positional ideas, isolate white's queen pawn and set up a battery on h2. So it's a perfectly viable system at a high level. It seems an aggressive use, basically the semi-Slav like defends the pawn triangle, liberating this bishop. There's going to be no problem piece. So e takes d4, and the main move here is not to just accept a pawn there. That's known to be well, it's just good for black. In fact, black just isolates the queen's pawn. And if knight takes c4, then there's queen takes g5, another trap. So what does white do? If he gives up the dark square bishop, this is just absolutely great for black. Not only is isolated the queen's pawn, he's got the bishop here. Maybe he's even going to kick that knight and put the bishop on this diagonal. So basically, this is the main move as well, knight b3. So it's a very, very tricky opening. And what we've seen with this navigation through the traps is, you know, Magnus is, even at this age, well, he's an IM. He knows about this Cambridge Springs, it seems, quite intimately. And he's not going to be given a positionally terrible position. The way he's playing it, knight b3, is a great move. Now, queen b6 keeps an eye on d4. So here, e takes d4 is the main move, not taking with the knight. If taking with the knight, this is quite popular, and apparently it's quite it's okay for black. Magnus takes with the pawn, but it's a little bit of a target in conjunction with a5 a4 plan, which Kasparov uses. Soon he first takes on c4 to isolate that, and now a5, so a4 incoming, so leaving the queen on b6 is annoying. Not going to c7 in one go. a4 forces a concession on the b4 square, and now queen c7. So as I say, black positionally, even though it's regarded as a trap opening, if we look at this position, what has black done positionally and tactically? There's no defensive knight on f3, so h2 is weaker. So this battery is more effective when it happens. There's an isolated queen's pawn Black hasn't paid much to get this position in terms of concessions. So it's a great system, it seems. Rook A E1. Nevertheless, there's some pressure on black still. H6. Bishop H4. And now this battery, Bishop D6. And here, Magnus just plays H3. There's some little traps behind the scenes. You can't play G5 here, trying to get material, because then there's Queen G6 check. In case you're wondering. So H3 is perfectly okay, and it seems this isolated queen's pawn though can be tapped into with a blockading move, which gains a tempo on the bishop. Clever, not just a routine one. It's hitting the bishop, because black doesn't want to allow bishop takes f6 with double pawns, but knight b6 appears playable in this position, just counter-attacking on c4. So if Magnus is another kind of, he doesn't want to have this positionally dead position. If he moves the bishop back here, then after knight fd5, that solves the bishop f6 problem. And black is in the driving seat, a fantastic blockade on the isolated queen's pawn. Fantastic battery. Black has achieved many other useful goals with this apparently trappy opening here. So Magnus has to play very precisely still. He does take on f6, even though it leaves his bishop potentially quite awkward here after knight takes c4. Now here, after knight takes c4, it doesn't really white doesn't really want to move the bishop back in this position. And actually, I do want to briefly check this position, because I think there might even be some forcing move ideas. Now maybe black's just better just generally with bishop e6. I just thought this forcing idea, it still doesn't work here. This battery can't be used like that. Knight e4 hitting c4 is good for white. And then putting the bishop here, and you've got loads of defects that you don't really want. Okay. So after knight takes c4, we have Magnus Carlsen here. He doesn't play a bishop retreat. He actually plays a stronger move, it seems. Knight e4. Now, if Kasparov took on f6, that would be a disaster. Not because of queen takes, but because of knight takes, and he's getting mated basically by force. Ouch. No, that's not going to happen with Kasparov playing black. He plays actually a great move in bishop h2 check, vacating the d6 square for the knight to protect itself away from the queen. So now black is actually threatening knight takes and pawn takes to win a piece. And it seems a very scary decision has to be made here. Otherwise, black is doing great. Maybe Kasparov had just expected, bishop e5, but then bishop takes. It looks as though it's just dissolving, for example, like this, and black seems to have a good position. But no, a very brave looking move is played instead of bishop e5. Magnus plays king takes h2, allowing a temporary discovered check. Doesn't do too much damage though. After knight takes e5, knight takes e4 check, pardon me, bishop e5. And now black is forced into a scary decision, having to go into a nasty looking pin. And here, there is a specific analysis video on the channel looking at this position around about here, if white could have got a massive advantage or a winning advantage. But it was actually, I think the conclusion is difficult, because fundamentally Kasparov has got the opposite coloured bishops here. So unless there's any major kingside attack, the opposite coloured bishops, even if white's a pawn up, it's going to be tricky. Magnus tries to torture the pin with queen c5. After rook d8, another pin is made use of, that pawn. And white wrenches out, winning a pawn basically after knight d4. Kasparov accepts a pawn loss here by playing knight f5. He's going into an ending, opposite colour bishops. So d takes, b takes, knight takes c6. So a pawn up for Magnus, but he was getting short on time, something like 3 minutes to 11 if you look at there's actual video of the game, in fact, to check out. But it's great, he's a pawn up, he's giving Kasparov a run for his money. So rook d1, queen e6, rook f e1, we have bishop b7, knight goes back. Some simplification now. Queen g6, threatening mate. Queen g4, which has the concession of double pawns here now on this side. Bishop c6, b3, f6. It's going to be difficult to win this position, basically. Some more simplification. Very, very difficult to win this. So Kasparov with the extra time probably wasn't too worried about this position. So here white plays b4. So another couple of pawns come off the board. But black seems set to set up a blockade on this diagonal, which can also be useful potentially for this g2 pawn. So the game continuation kind of shows that as well. h5, an interesting decision by Kasparov, getting rid of white's doubled pawns. You might think, why would he do that? He's confident enough in his blockade of white's extra pawn here. And we see after this rook infiltration, yeah, white's kind of tied down to g2. He's not going to make progress on the other side. He's getting behind that a pawn. It looks stone dead, opposite colour bishop draw now. One of the points is to get the king here away from the checks. And then there's counter-attack on g2, which has to be defended. And here, a draw was agreed. In the final position, let's have a quick check. A quick check here. What would happen? Rook takes a5 is possible. You might think bishop d4. Here black has rook f5, but maybe even better, rook a6, defending f6 like that. And this is much clearer that black's totally comfortable here. It's a total stable position, opposite colour bishops. A remarkable clash, a remarkable achievement really for the 13-year-old Magnus Carlsen, and showing even at this age, well, he's an international master by this stage, ranked 700 in the world, but he certainly navigated the Cambridge Springs, all the traps, very well. And he also, beyond that, avoided suffering a major positional concession of having a dreadful isolated queen's pawn with no counterplay. So that was, in a way, an even greater achievement. And he ended up being a pawn up. Kasparov, though, seemed to have enough defensive resources to hold. Okay, what a fantastic encounter from a historical perspective. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.